Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring the absolutely fascinating intersection of culture, language, and modern technology. Just think for a second about the apps you use, the software you rely on, and the way you seamlessly search for information all over the globe. Every single day, we lean heavily on digital platforms to connect. But beneath that totally seamless connection, well, there's a profound kind of hidden crisis happening right now regarding the actual survival of our languages in this hyperconnected world. So we have to start with a massive, almost uncomfortable question. Is the digital age actually going to kill off our languages? I mean, we're smack in the middle of a digital revolution that is fundamentally rewiring how human communication works. Algorithms, artificial intelligence, these giant global platforms, they're increasingly dictating which languages thrive and which ones just kind of fade into obscurity. It sounds dramatic, for sure, but for linguists and technologists, this is a very real existential concern. And history actually backs this up. Technological leaps always pose a major threat to linguistic diversity. Take Gutenberg's printing press. It was an absolute game changer for standardizing major languages and spreading knowledge across Europe. But it had a dark side. It directly led to the extinction of regional dialects like Dalmatian and Cornish, simply because they weren't the ones being printed. If a language wasn't in the books back then, it didn't survive the era. Today, the modern internet connects the globe instantly, but it threatens to marginalize non-English languages in the exact same way. If your language isn't woven into the underlying code of the internet, it literally risks disappearing from public life. To put this into perspective, Europe alone has about 80 different languages. That represents a massive, beautifully complex cultural heritage, but it is currently at risk. When we look at this from the angle of building a unified digital market, having 80 distinct linguistic borders creates crazy fragmentation. It creates these invisible silos across the continent where data, commerce, and ideas simply can't flow freely without some kind of immediate, heavy intervention. And that diversity, it comes with a staggering financial cost. The European Union spends roughly 1 billion euros every single year just on translation and interpretation services. If you zoom out to the wider European market for translation and software localization, it's actually over an 8 billion euro industry. But here is the real kicker. Even with that massive financial commitment, human translation simply cannot scale to the speed and sheer volume of the modern internet. It only covers a tiny, tiny fraction of our daily communication. Technology absolutely has to step in. So, how do we navigate this bottleneck and actually save these languages? Well, we are grounding our explainer today in a comprehensive meta-net study that focuses specifically on Italian. We're using this as our diagnostic tool because Italian makes for the perfect case study. It beautifully highlights the specific technological and cultural crisis that major European languages are facing right this minute. Which brings us to Section 1, the state of Italian, a giant at risk. Now, you might hear the data and think Italian is perfectly safe. It definitely suffers from an illusion of safety because it is huge. It's tied with English as the second most spoken native language in the EU, boasting 62 million native speakers, with millions more globally. But here's the thing. Digital survival plays by entirely different rules than physical, spoken survival. Having a large population doesn't automatically grant you digital immunity. Despite its massive size, Italian faces a really fierce battle online. Let's break down why. First, there's a heavy influx of unadapted English loanwords, or Anglicisms. Think of Italian tech circles constantly dropping words like smart working or downloadare instead of their native equivalents. Second, millions of Italians are bilingual, speaking standard Italian alongside a strong regional dialect like Lombard, Neapolitan, or Sicilian. This is a total nightmare for standard voice assistants, which can get completely tripped up by these diverse regional accents and vocabularies. And finally, as internet access explodes in developing nations globally, the overall proportion of Italian-speaking users on the web is actively shrinking, which dilutes its digital influence. Let's move to Section 2, Language Technology, the digital lifeboat. So how do we actually prevent Italian and other languages from being sidelined? Language technology isn't just one magic tool. It sits right at the complex intersection of text, voice, and knowledge processing. It's this multidisciplinary web of tools, everything from speech recognition to semantic search, all overlapping to try and make sense of human communication. Let's formally define this invisible engine. Language technology, or LT, refers to the software systems that connect human language to knowledge. It is the crucial layer that translates human chaos into clean, machine-readable data. It allows computers to process, translate, and actually understand both text and voice, regardless of linguistic barriers. It's the very foundation that allows our digital society to operate across borders. But to grasp its true power, we really need to look under the hood. That takes us to Section 3, How Machines Learn Language. How exactly does a machine learn a complex language like Italian? There's a fascinating parallel here between a toddler learning to speak and a neural network ingesting data. See, machines learn language in two distinct ways that kind of mirror our own human journey. As humans, we learn naturally as kids just by listening to our families, soaking up the patterns without knowing any of the rules, or we learn later in school by rigorously memorizing strict grammar. Machines do something incredibly similar. They either process massive bilingual text datasets to intuitively find hidden mathematical patterns, or they are painstakingly hard-coded with expert linguistic rules by human programmers. This essentially leads to the two main development paths in the industry: statistical approaches versus rule-based approaches. Right now, tech giants rely heavily on fast, data-driven statistical models, and these are fantastic for English. But they suffer from a major vulnerability known as data sparsity. They can fail wildly from minor languages or regional dialects simply because there just isn't enough bilingual text on the internet to train them properly. On the flip side, rule-based models know the grammar perfectly because human experts literally wrote the code. But they are labor-intensive, super slow, and incredibly expensive to build. Ultimately, the future of language technology is for sure a hybrid of both, combining that rapid scalability of data with the deep precision of human-crafted rules. When we take all that theory and put it into practice, it builds out into a very strict software architecture. When a machine reads a sentence, it doesn't just glance at it the way you or I do. It systematically forces that data through a highly structured pipeline. Specifically, a computer breaks down text from basic formatting all the way up to complex contextual meaning in 3 steps. First is pre-processing. This strips out the junk, handles the formatting, detects the language itself, and normalizes tricky things like Italian accents and apostrophes. Second is grammatical analysis, where the machine identifies the structural skeleton of the sentence, the verbs, the subjects, the nouns. And finally, we hit semantic analysis. This is historically the hardest part for AI to get right. It attempts to figure out the actual meaning based on the surrounding context, resolving things like pronouns. Without this final step, the machine knows the words but has zero clue what they actually mean. Let's look at Section 4, Real-World Applications. Let's connect this abstract tech back to the things you literally just did on your devices today. We are entirely dependent on these invisible linguistic workflows. Every time you Google a random question, dictate a text message to your phone, talk to your car's GPS, run a spell check on a resume, or translate a web page on the fly, you are relying on these complex architectures. If language technology fails or simply doesn't support your language, your daily digital interactions essentially grind to a complete halt. Take something as simple and ubiquitous as a spell checker. It actually requires incredibly deep linguistic models to function properly. It isn't just passively checking your document against a static digital dictionary. It is actively running that 3-step pipeline we just discussed in real time, constantly analyzing the context of your entire sentence. Let me give you a brilliant example from Italian. Let's look at the phrase 15 scali versus 15 gradini. A basic dictionary-style spell checker will not flag 15 scali as an error in a text about climbing up to an apartment. Why? Because scali is a perfectly valid Italian word for flight stopovers or layovers. It's spelled correctly, but it takes advanced semantic analysis to know that in the context of physical exertion and walking up to a room, you definitely meant 15 gradini, or stairs. Without that deep layer of semantic tech, the system completely fails the user by missing the obvious contextual error. And finally, Section 5, Securing the Digital Future. As we look ahead, the survival of European languages, and honestly all global languages, depends entirely on investing in these deep technologies. The MetaNet study makes it crystal clear. Language technologies build bridges for Europe's future. By bridging these linguistic divides, we aren't just translating words on a screen, we are ensuring equal participation in the global digital economy for absolutely everyone. If we don't build these technological bridges, languages will simply become obsolete in the digital sphere, leading to a massive loss of cultural heritage and leaving millions of speakers economically disconnected. So as voice interfaces, artificial intelligence, and the internet continue to evolve at just a breakneck pace, we have to ask ourselves a pretty vital question. Will your native language have the technology required to survive? Or is it going to be left behind in the digital dark ages? Take a moment today to really think about the future of your own language online. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope it sparked some curiosity about the invisible linguistic engines powering our connected world.